Bullies targeted the wrong new girl, not realizing she had military training from a Marine. They recorded her expecting her to flee, but instead, they ended up on the ground. The footage went viral, leading to her suspension. Subsequently, she faced threats, insults, a brick thrown through her window, and attempts to break her resolve. However, she was raised to be resilient. Share where you are watching from today before delving into the story. In the morning light, shadows stretched across Hawthorne Grove High School. Tiana Brooks stood at the base of the front steps, clutching a worn class schedule tightly. The paper bore creases from repeated folding and unfolding, almost translucent at the edges from her restless handling. Adjusting her backpack strap, she felt its familiar weight against her shoulders, a practical choice assisted by her grandmother. Her appearance exuded neatness, from her immaculate braids to her pressed navy blazer and polished shoes. "Just blend in and endure the day," she murmured to herself, her breath visible in the chilly air. Her grandmother's advice echoed in her mind, guiding her to maintain a confident stance. Years of Miss Celia's disciplined teachings had ingrained military-like precision in her posture. Sometimes it felt as though she could hear Marine Corps cadences whenever her grandmother spoke, prompting her to take a deep, calming breath. Tiana ascended the steps with deliberate and calculated steps, unfazed by the curious gazes and whispers of the students around her. She maintained her focus on the heavy double doors ahead, ignoring the chaos of noise and movement inside the hallway. Consulting her schedule for locker number 2187, she navigated through the school, passing by students who fell silent as she passed, feeling the weight of their stares but continuing her steady stride. Despite being the only black student among a sea of white faces, Tiana drew upon her experiences in Atlanta to steel herself against the discomfort. As she approached three privileged boys leaning against lockers, one of them, a tall boy with styled blonde hair and a Letterman jacket, taunted her with a cruel smirk, triggering a familiar sense of unease within her. With a permanent smirk etched on his face, the boy chuckled. "Hey, what's up, Wakanda?" Tiana continued walking with a carefully neutral expression on her face, a mask she had perfected through years of practice. Recalling her grandmother's advice, "Don't let them see a reaction," she felt the gazes of others on her as she passed by, and their snickers reached her ears. However, she maintained her pace, viewing each step as a small triumph. In her AP history class, Tiana deliberately chose a seat at the front, strategically making it more challenging for people to stare at her from behind. This choice demonstrated that she was unafraid of being noticed. As the students entered and settled in, she heard the same boys taking seats directly behind her. Their presence felt burdensome, and their hushed conversations felt like prickling needles on her back. Mr. Dalton, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses that frequently slipped down his nose, began the lesson on the Civil War. Upon inquiring about the economic factors contributing to the conflict, Tiana confidently raised her hand. Having studied this material at her previous school in Atlanta and even composed an essay that earned her an outstanding grade, she was well-versed. When called upon by Mr. Dalton, she responded clearly and confidently, stating, "The Southern economy heavily relied on slave labor for agricultural production, leading to a significant economic gap between the industrial North and the agricultural South, thus complicating compromise." Following her answer, whispers erupted behind her, with comments insinuating that she was trying to act differently. Amidst the mutterings, "Wakanda Forever" was heard, followed by stifled laughter that rippled through the classroom. In the back row, Mr. Dalton carried on with his lecture, seemingly unaffected by the disturbance, his gaze sweeping over the class without pinpointing the source. Tiana clenched her fists under her desk, her nails pressing into her palms, yet she maintained a straight posture, focusing on the whiteboard where Mr. Dalton was noting down important dates. The morning felt never-ending, with each class blending into the next. By lunchtime, Tiana's jaw ached from concealing her emotions and refraining from speaking out. The cafeteria was vast, filled with round tables and the aroma of institutional food, a mix of overcooked vegetables and something resembling pizza. Students congregated in their usual groups, their lively conversations creating a background noise she felt detached from. Tiana settled at an unoccupied table by the wall, beneath a faded school banner, unwrapping the sandwich her grandmother had prepared, with a note inside urging her to stand tall. The crinkling of the brown paper provided solace amid the cafeteria. Chaos. Suddenly, a hand appeared at the corner of her vision, causing her lunch tray to tumble, spilling milk and food noisily onto the linoleum floor. The cafeteria fell silent, the abrupt hush more piercing than the previous commotion, as if time had momentarily frozen. "Oops," a voice above her remarked, one of the boys from earlier, feigning innocence. Laughter erupted nearby, led by the blonde boy in the letterman jacket who observed from a short distance away, the laughter spreading throughout the cafeteria like wildfire. The sound of the growing wave reverberated off the walls, creating an atmosphere of tension as Tiana sat motionless with her hands concealed beneath the table to hide the subtle twitch betraying the intense emotions churning within her. Walking towards the gymnasium of Hawthorne Grove High School, Tiana's steps echoed on the concrete, rhythmic and deliberate, like a metronome, with the afternoon sun casting long shadows behind her. The nearly deserted parking lot, save for a few remaining cars of teachers and late-staying athletes, felt heavy and still, hinting at an impending storm of trouble. Adjusting her backpack strap, Tiana maintained the impeccable posture instilled in her by her grandmother, who always emphasized standing confidently. The back of the gym, her usual pickup spot, provided a quiet refuge away from the bustling crowd where Miss Celia could easily pick her up post-school. Sensing a change in the atmosphere, Tiana noticed the oppressive silence, purposeful and thick, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The approaching multiple footsteps confirmed her suspicion, without the need to turn around, as she recognized the persistent whispers and snickers that had trailed her throughout the day, akin to wolves on the hunt, growing bolder with each passing hour. She had never been easy prey. "Thought we'd give you a proper welcome, city girl." Kyle's voice cut through the silence, carrying false friendliness that thinly veiled a darker intent, a cruelty that had been brewing since her arrival. Slowly turning to face her tormentors, Tiana exuded a calculated composure. Positioned slightly ahead of the group, Brett held his phone out, recording with a steady red light blinking, ready to capture what they assumed would lead to her embarrassment. His smirk blatantly revealed his intentions. Chase stood on Brett's left, appearing somewhat uneasy but resolute, while Kyle positioned himself on the right, attempting to block her potential escape route as if they had orchestrated this surprise. A faint twitch appeared at the corner of Tiana's mouth, not quite a smile, but a gesture close to it, a nod to her grandmother's teachings resonating in her mind as if Miss Celia were present beside her. These lessons emphasized starting no fights but always finishing them, reminding her that control was paramount. Tiana calmly let her backpack slide off her shoulder, gently landing on the ground before assuming a poised stance, moving with a practiced grace honed through years of training with Miss Celia. Without uttering a word or issuing hollow threats, she observed them, her dark eyes meticulous, assessing their positions with acute precision, noting their muscle tension, weight distribution, and anxious energy. As anticipated, Kyle made the first move, propelled by impatience. His rushed attempt to grab her exuded arrogance rather than skill. With a swift sidestep, Tiana deftly intercepted his extended arm, leveraging his own momentum against him, executing a flawless hip throw reminiscent of her grandmother's teachings. Kyle momentarily lost his assurance, as his expression transformed from confidence to bewilderment before he crashed onto his back, the impact audibly expelling the air from his lungs. Chase's eyes widened in the empty space as he watched his friend suddenly fall. An initial expression of surprise was quickly replaced by anger. He hurried towards her from the side, but his movements were easy to predict. Tiana skillfully dodged his attempt to tackle her, moving away like flowing water with effortless grace. Chase's momentum caused him to crash into the gymnasium wall with a loud thud, followed by a groan of pain echoing through the deserted parking lot. Meanwhile, Brett, still recording with one hand, rushed towards Tiana from behind, assuming she was distracted by Chase. However, Tiana, always alert to her surroundings thanks to Miss Celia's teachings, deftly spun and gripped his wrist before smoothly sweeping his legs out from under him. Brett landed heavily on his back, his expensive attire gathering dust from the ground upon impact. Without hesitation, Tiana gently placed her boot on Brett's chest, not applying pressure to harm him, but to convey a message. Her breathing remained steady, her face calm yet determined, devoid of gloating or threats. Her serene eyes spoke volumes, silently declaring, "I am not the person you assumed me to be." As the boys groaned and struggled to rise, Kyle lay on his side, gasping for air, his face flushed with embarrassment. Chase, pushing himself away from the wall while nursing his shoulder, and Brett, beneath Tiana's boot with a mix of pain and shame on his face, both stared at her in disbelief. The peaceful scene was interrupted by the sound of an approaching vehicle, and Miss Celia's sedan came into view at the opposite end of the parking lot, its engine softly humming. Tiana disengaged from Brett by lifting her foot off his chest and returned to retrieve her backpack, displaying the same calm composure she had maintained throughout the confrontation. She effortlessly slung the bag over her shoulder as though nothing out of the ordinary had occurred, completely disregarding the significant impact she had just made. Meanwhile, Brett struggled to gather himself, his previously neat appearance now disheveled, his pricey attire covered in dust, and his phone lying nearby, still recording the unexpected turn of events. His eyes followed Tiana as she walked away, a mix of shame and newfound admiration evident in his gaze. Tiana made her way towards her grandmother's car with deliberate and unhurried steps without looking back. The rhythmic sound of her boots on the concrete resonated through the silent parking lot, increasing the distance between her and the boys, leaving them to contend with their wounded pride and sore bodies, a lesson etched in their bruises. As Tiana approached the car, Miss Celia's vehicle hummed softly at the curb, and she kept her steady gait with flawless posture and unchanged expression. The sunlight caught her braids, casting a dignified and strong silhouette against the golden light as she moved forward. In the kitchen, though small, was immaculate, with polished countertops shining under the warm light. Steam rose from the pot of rice on the stove as Tiana stirred it methodically, the wooden spoon swirling gently through the grains, filling the air with the comforting aroma of jasmine rice. The fragrant air from the seasoned chicken she had prepared earlier mingled in the room as the evening news played softly on the TV in the living room, providing a serene backdrop to their typical dinner routine. Miss Celia Brooks sat at the worn oak table, scrolling through her phone with reading glasses resting on her nose, her Marine Corps coffee mug, faded yet well-maintained, placed nearby. Her silver hair, neatly pulled back in a bun, reflected the discipline of her military past, even as she wore a casual navy t-shirt and comfortable slacks. "You've stirred up the internet, dear," Miss Celia remarked nonchalantly, her voice tinged with a mix of concern and perhaps pride or humor, a faint smile on her lips. Tiana, maintaining a composed expression, halted her stirring, but responded coolly, "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Grandma," though an uneasy sensation gripped her stomach upon realizing that she had been recorded at school. Miss Celia pushed her chair back, the legs softly scraping the linoleum as she approached Tiana and extended her phone, holding it steadily. "Take a look, my child," she urged. The video, though shaky, clearly displayed Tiana under the harsh fluorescent lights of the school hallway, observing herself in the recording. As she watched the footage on the small screen, she observed the precision with which she had moved, a skill instilled in her by Miss Celia since childhood. The video captured Kyle's charge and sudden fall as she elegantly evaded him, as well as Chase's unsuccessful attempt to grab her arm and Brett's surprising move from behind. All of these events unfolded in under a minute, a choreography she had not desired but had been trained for. The last scene depicted Tiana placing her boot strategically on Brett's chest, her expression composed amidst the chaos that surrounded her. The headline boldly proclaimed above the video read, "New Black Girl Body Slams Racist Seniors, Trained by Marine Grandma." Tiana's gaze shifted to the comment section, despite her reluctance. She scrolled through a mix of toxic and supportive remarks that both stung and comforted her. Returning the phone to Miss Celia, she struggled to steady her hand, concealing her inner turmoil. "It's not a significant issue," she muttered, turning her attention back to the rice sticking to the pot's bottom. Her grandmother's gentle yet firm hand on her shoulder interrupted her. Miss Celia's touch was familiar and grounding, prompting Tiana to meet her gaze. The dark eyes held stories of resilience and survival, mirroring her own experiences. "You executed the techniques precisely as I taught you, with finesse and control," Miss Celia reassured her. "But this transcends the boys. It's a larger issue now." Tiana nodded, her throat tight with emotion, a lump forming as she realized the gravity of the situation. The rice, overlooked momentarily, bubbled behind her, causing her inability to swallow. Grandma Miss Celia's expression softened, her stern features relaxing into vulnerability, a rare instance of peeking beneath her tough exterior. "You're not in a war zone," she said, her tone serious but gentle, her fingers providing reassuring pressure on Tiana's shoulder. "But that doesn't mean you stop being a soldier. The world still needs warriors, baby, sometimes more than ever." As they performed their usual table-setting tasks with military precision, placing plates, forks, and napkins meticulously, Tiana served the rice, scraping the crispy bottom while adding the chicken she had cooked earlier. Despite the comforting routine, her hands felt unresponsive and distant, as if belonging to a different person. They ate in silence, Tiana mechanically taking small, tasteless bites, her mind clouded with worry, flavors escaping her notice. The background noise from the TV went unnoticed, her thoughts consumed by the video, the comments, and the faces she would encounter at school the next day. Some admiring, others hateful, none truly understanding her. Miss Celia observed Tiana closely over her water glass, her perceptive eyes missing nothing, reading her granddaughter like a familiar book. Setting aside her buzzing phone, which received occasional notifications from old Marine friends who had stumbled upon the video, with messages lighting up the screen, she finally spoke. "You flipped the whole school upside down." Tiana avoided her grandmother's gaze, her heart torn by conflicting emotions, pride mingling with inner turmoil over how she had handled herself, just as she always had. The fear of the unknown gripped her, contemplating how this attention could alter things. Uncertainty lingered about the significance of this moment and the person she must become in this unwanted spotlight. In silence, she and her grandmother, two warriors from different worlds, one a Marine, the other a student, sat at the table, facing an unexpected battle they both felt ready for. Suddenly, the intercom's sharp crackle sliced through the tranquility of Mrs. Peterson's English class, singling out Tiana Brooks to report to the principal's office. Although her heart raced, Tiana's expression remained composed as she gathered her belongings, anticipating this moment since the video went viral. The classroom fell silent, with every gaze fixated on her, some filled with curiosity, others with judgment, and a few with hidden satisfaction. Taking each step with purpose, Tiana methodically packed her bag under the watchful eyes of her peers, recalling Miss Celia's lessons on controlling what one can. Straightening her posture and adjusting her sweater, she moved decisively towards the door, feeling the vast expanse of the floor beneath her feet, magnifying her solitude. "Do you need a pass, Mrs.?" Peterson asked softly, offering a yellow slip with a hint of concern or perhaps pity in her eyes, unsettling Tiana's stomach. "No, ma'am," Tiana replied steadily, masking her inner turmoil with a composed demeanor. The hallway appeared longer than usual, with each step creating echoing sounds against the lockers. A few students peered out from classroom entrances, and Tiana could sense their stares piercing her back. Walking towards the principal's office felt like a solemn journey, with whispers trailing her like shadows. Bits of conversations hushed as she passed by, while the main office exuded a cool and sterile atmosphere, adorned with motivational posters on success and teamwork. The secretary, Mrs. Wells, barely looked up from her computer and simply gestured towards the heavy wooden door marked Principal Howard. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, making each passing moment feel like an eternity. Principal Howard, a tall man with graying temples and a perpetual frown, sat behind his imposing desk with silver-rimmed glasses reflecting the morning light. His office smelled of coffee and furniture polish, creating an overly clean and quiet ambiance. Without lifting his gaze from the folder, he instructed Tiana to take a seat. As she sat down on one of the rigid chairs facing him, the leather made a loud creak in the stillness of the room. He inquired if she was aware of the reason for her presence, his tone devoid of emotion. Tiana, trying to steady her trembling hands, acknowledged that it was regarding the previous day. Principal Howard finally met her eyes, his expression stern, mentioning the violent altercation with 3 fellow students. Despite her chest tightening, Tiana managed to maintain a steady voice while explaining that they were following her and posed a threat. He interrupted her, stating that the video evidence showed otherwise, revealing her engaging in physical violence against the other students. His pen tapping impatiently against the desk, the principal interrupted Tiana as she recounted being cornered behind the gym for a physical confrontation that only she engaged in. The principal firmly stated that her actions were unacceptable at Hawthorne Grove, leading to Tiana's suspension for 3 days. Although Tiana wanted to argue her case, she was left speechless as the principal ended the conversation. As Tiana sat in shock, the door suddenly burst open, and Miss Celia Brooks, in her military uniform, entered the room exuding authority and demanding an explanation for her granddaughter's punishment. Decades of military experience added a weight of authority to Celia's controlled voice, and her impeccable posture exuded confidence. Principal Howard's jaw tightened as he emphasized the gravity of the situation, but Miss Celia interjected sharply, highlighting how the boys had targeted and intended to harm her. Each of her words hit with precision, like bullets finding their mark. The video evidence clearly depicted what the boys wanted it to show, and Miss Celia criticized the unjust punishment of the victim while the attackers remained unscathed. The tension in the room escalated as Principal Howard tried to assert his authority, but Miss Celia's unwavering stance showed no sign of backing down. As they left, Miss Celia's disappointment with the flawed system was palpable, and the car ride home was filled with a heavy silence. Tiana observed the passing scenery in silence as Miss Celia's clenched jaw and tight grip on the steering wheel betrayed her buried anger. The absence of music on the radio underscored the tension between them until Tiana, choking back tears, expressed her frustration at being punished despite acting in self-defense. "Why do I still feel like I'm the one who is losing?" Tiana questioned. Miss Celia's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter in response to the unspoken query lingering heavily in the air, laden with harsh truth. The basement resonated with the repetitive thumping of fists meeting the canvas bag. Tiana's controlled and precise movements on the cold concrete floor belied the anger pulsing within her. Despite the sweat glistening on her forehead, her breathing remained steady and composed, a reflection of the lessons imparted by Miss Celia. The basement, once a sanctuary, had evolved into a humble home gym over the years. An aged heavy bag dangled from the exposed beams, its leather exterior worn smooth from years of use. Exercise mats adorned one corner, complemented by motivational posters and Marine Corps flags on the concrete walls. A solitary window cast elongated shadows across the floor, bathing the surroundings in a gentle golden light. Tiana's knuckles were meticulously wrapped in white tape, each strip applied with deliberate precision, a silent testament to her inner turmoil. Since their return from the principal's office, Tiana had chosen muteness, opting to let her physical actions convey the words left unspoken. The rhythmic thuds of her punches conveyed a narrative her lips refused to voice. The wooden stairs announced Miss Celia's descent into the basement, her posture exuding the seasoned confidence of someone with years of experience. In her hands, she carried a peanut butter and honey sandwich, Tiana's favorite since childhood, a subtle yet significant display of care that lingered unspoken between them. Initially silent, Miss Celia observed her granddaughter's vigorous workout, recognizing the controlled rage simmering beneath the surface. Tiana's precise and disciplined movements, reminiscent of a skilled Marine, showcased her efficiency as she threw punches with squared shoulders. Although this display would have made Celia proud in a different situation, it now caused a familiar ache in her heart. "You should eat something," Celia eventually suggested in a gentle yet firm tone, placing a plate on a small table near the mats in an attempt to restore order to their tumultuous world. Completing her jab-crosshook combination, Tiana acknowledged her grandmother's presence by stopping the heavy bag's swing, maintaining controlled breaths as her chest rose and fell steadily. Silently, she picked up the sandwich, but left it aside on a pile of magazines, clearly refusing the offer. The basement grew quiet, except for the sound of tape being adjusted, as Tiana resumed her rhythm against the bag, her feet finding their position on the concrete floor. With each impact echoing like a heartbeat, Celia observed for a moment before imparting her wisdom. Violence is a tool, not a solution. The weight of her experience colored her soft-spoken words as they lingered in the air between them. Tiana's following punch struck with more force, disrupting her flow. Pausing with her hands dropping to her sides, she expressed her pent-up emotions in a controlled yet trembling voice. "I didn't opt for violence. I chose not to be cornered by them." Meeting her grandmother's eyes, she continued, "I'm not upset because I fought back. I'm upset because it didn't." The weight of the truth in those words was undeniable, filling the basement heavily. Despite all the training, discipline, and careful control, they had not shielded her from injustice. Even though she had defended herself as she had been taught, she found herself suspended while her attackers walked free. The unfairness of the situation hung between them like an invisible weight. Celia nodded slowly, her understanding flooding her features. "That anger is justified," she said softly as she stepped closer, but added, "Don't let it shape who you become." Tiana's jaw tensed as she turned back to the bag, striking faster and harder, yet still maintaining control. Each impact seemed to resonate with unspoken thoughts of unfairness and injustice. Her knuckles stung beneath the tape, but the pain felt distant, almost comforting. As the afternoon light faded from the small basement window, Tiana continued her solitary workout, unaffected by the smell of dinner drifting down the stairs. Each punch and kick she delivered was a deliberate statement. Celia visited twice more, finding her granddaughter maintaining the same steady rhythm. The uneaten sandwich lay on the magazines, untouched as the basement grew darker, with shadows stretching across the concrete floor. Concern deepened the lines on Celia's weathered face with each visit. As night fell and the house above grew quiet, the absence of Tiana spoke volumes. The empty space at the dinner table stood as a silent symbol of wounds that transcended words. The sudden crack of something hitting the front porch interrupted the silence. In the quiet of the evening, Celia swiftly made her way to the front door, her military instincts still keen after many years. Upon opening the door, she noticed a rock with a paper attached to it, inscribed with 4 words in bold black marker, "Stay in your place." She calmly picked up the rock, her expression steely, as she crumpled the paper in her hand, feeling a familiar fire burning inside her, the same fire she recognized in her granddaughter's gaze. The next day, as Miss Celia parked her car in the school lot, the morning sun creating long shadows, Tiana sat in silence, clutching her backpack tightly like a shield after her 3-day suspension felt like a surreal experience. Facing the daunting brick building of Hawthorne Grove High, Miss Celia turned to Tiana, her gaze warm yet serious, conveying decades of military resolve in her quiet but firm words. "You don't shrink, you don't snap, you survive. Remember that, baby girl?" Tiana nodded in silence, her throat tight with emotion, her appearance impeccable, her uniform a shield against what awaited her inside. Each deliberate movement as she exited the car reflected her training since childhood, though her stride lacked its usual purpose as she walked towards the school. As she entered, Tiana's steps were cautious and deliberate, reminiscent of someone navigating uncertain terrain. The imposing front doors felt unusually weighty today, almost as if they had grown heavier overnight. Upon their closure, which resounded heavily in her chest, she immediately sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The typically bustling hallway was eerily silent, with a strange quietness trailing her like ripples in water from a dropped stone. Students parted ways as she neared, some hugging lockers, others hurriedly seeking refuge in classrooms. Their gazes averted from her direct stare, but she could sense their eyes on her when she turned away. Murmurs began behind her, too soft to discern words, but filled with tones of sharpness, hostility, and fear. In her first period English class, her usual seat in the second row sat conspicuously empty, seemingly waiting as if a trap. Surrounding desks seemed to inch away, creating an empty bubble around her as she settled in. Mrs. Peterson, who typically greeted her warmly in the mornings, now kept her focus fixed on the computer screen during attendance. When Tiana raised her hand to participate in a discussion about The Great Gatsby, the teacher's glance passed over hers, selecting another student instead. This pattern repeated in subsequent classes, with teachers who once commended her now treating her as if she were invisible, a spectral presence in their rooms. When they did acknowledge her, it was with forced smiles and curt language, as if wary of any form of interaction. Even Mr. Rivera, her typically amiable Spanish teacher, avoided meeting her gaze when returning last week's quiz with a flawless score. During the passing periods of her third and fourth classes, Tiana paused at her locker to swap out her books, but the lock seemed off, causing her fingers to fumble. After a second attempt, the lock finally clicked open, revealing rough letters etched deeply into the metal. "Go back to where you came from." The menacing words appeared as if they were carved with a sharp object, making the metal curl at each stroke. Despite the unsettling discovery, Tiana managed to collect her belongings from the empty locker, except for her textbooks. Realizing where they might be, she calmly adjusted her backpack strap and proceeded to the girls' restroom on the second floor. Unsurprisingly, the last stall held the remnants of her books, intentionally destroyed with precision. Although the ink had bled, she remained composed, standing silently as the bell rang for her next class. As lunchtime approached, rather than joining the bustling crowd in the cafeteria, Tiana chose to retreat to the football field. Sitting atop the deserted bleachers, she overlooked the school, contemplating the events of the day. Well before anyone could reach her, she could spot them from a distance. The metal bench felt icy against her uniform skirt as she unwrapped the perfectly cut sandwich Miss Celia had prepared that morning, sans crusts, just the way she preferred. Despite not eating, she admired the clear, vivid blue sky above, making everything below it seem more distinct and real. The afternoon classes mirrored the morning's tense atmosphere, with her chemistry lab partner urgently requesting a new assignment and whispering to the teacher while anxiously eyeing her. In history, she discreetly covered the word thug, written in bold black permanent marker on her desk with a notebook, carrying on as if nothing had happened, her handwriting immaculate as always. As the final bell rang, Tiana waited until the halls had emptied before swiftly collecting what she needed from her locker, paying the scratched words little attention in the afternoon light, focusing solely on her task at hand. Later that evening, in the tranquility of her bedroom, she began her homework after retrieving her folder from her backpack, discovering a folded photograph that slipped out, instantly recognizing it as the picture of Miss Celia in her Marine Corps dress blues that she kept in her locker. Someone had defaced it with cruel words in red ink, a painful revelation. Tiana held the defaced photo on the glossy paper, observing the disapproval in her grandmother's eyes. She remained composed, sitting at the edge of her bed as the afternoon light faded, casting shadows across the room. The kitchen was dimly lit as they both sat at the dinner table, silence enveloping the room except for the sound of forks against plates and the refrigerator's hum. Tiana listlessly played with her food, her shoulders tense and hunched up, as if trying to shrink herself. The fiery defiance from the confrontation with the boys had vanished, replaced by a heavy, somber mood. Miss Celia, noticing the change in her granddaughter, recognized the familiar signs of inner turmoil and distress. As dusk settled outside and the streetlights flickered on, Tiana's demeanor reflected her inner turmoil. Miss Celia, concerned by Tiana's behavior mirroring that of young Marines under stress, observed the subtle signs of her distress with a deepening worry. "How was your first day back?" she inquired gently, sensing the weight of the unspoken turmoil hanging in the air. She spoke softly, trying to break the growing silence between them. "Okay." Tiana kept her gaze on her plate, her voice barely audible as she asked, "Did you manage to catch up on your assignments? Any trouble from anyone?" Without looking up, she pushed a green bean to the edge of her plate. The response, "No," hung in the air, lacking conviction. Each reply seemed flat and lifeless, like stones falling into water. Setting down her fork, Miss Celia's eyes showed the pain of watching her granddaughter withdraw into herself, a feeling deeper and more personal than anything she faced on a battlefield. "You'll need to express your feelings eventually, my dear," she said firmly yet gently, drawing from years of experience and love. Her unwavering gaze searched for any sign of vulnerability in Tiana. Suddenly, Tiana's fork struck the table with a sharp crack, breaking the silence in the house. "What's the use?" Tiana's voice trembled with raw emotion, the first glimpse of real feeling that evening. Before Miss Celia could respond, Tiana abruptly stood up, nearly toppling her chair in her rush to flee. The chair wobbled momentarily before settling back on all four legs. Tiana's footsteps thundered up the stairs, culminating in the resounding slam of her bedroom door. Miss Celia sat alone at the table, her dinner forgotten. Closing her eyes, she took a deep breath, drawing on the discipline that guided her through years of service. This wasn't a military operation. It was her granddaughter, her beloved child, slipping away. Miss Celia's extensive training seemed ineffective against this specific opponent as she ascended the stairs to check on Tiana. Her usual habits of order faded away. The house's familiar creaking sounds, typically comforting, now echoed with concern. Each step felt increasingly burdensome as she softly knocked on Tiana's closed door, receiving no response, just silence. With a gentle turn of the handle, the door revealed an empty room with a neatly made bed and a slightly open window allowing a cool evening breeze to enter. The bathroom door down the hall was shut, with the sound of running water emanating from behind it. Tiana's open journal lay on the bed, its pages disheveled as if hastily dropped there. Miss Celia respected Tiana's privacy and space for processing, but the journal's appearance tugged at her instincts, signaling something amiss. As she sat on the bed, the journal's contents revealed Tiana's normally neat handwriting, now sharp and dark, leaving impressions on the pages beneath due to the forceful writing. Entries from recent days portrayed a troubling descent, with Tiana feeling ignored and invisible by others. The latest entry, dated that day, struck a chord with Miss Celia, hinting at thoughts of disappearing to restore normalcy. Overwhelmed, Miss Celia closed the journal, feeling the weight of Tiana's words pressing down on her with a heavy intensity. The sound of the running water in the bathroom felt overwhelming and conspicuous as Miss Celia's chest tightened. Despite her legs shaking, she descended the stairs cautiously and deliberately, relying on her military training to keep her steady, even with her mind filled with frightening scenarios. Sitting on the living room couch, she clutched the warm leather-covered journal tightly, feeling a coldness within her. The usual determination in her eyes was now replaced with fear, as she ran her fingers over the journal's well-worn edges, containing years of Tiana's thoughts. In a hushed voice, she uttered, "No, not my girl, not like this," turning it into a prayer and a vow. Upstairs, the water continued to flow, while time seemed to drag on downstairs, with the quietness only interrupted by the rhythmic sound of fists hitting leather. Tiana, with her feet moving deliberately on the concrete floor, was already hard at work in the dim basement, her focus distant and unwavering, despite the sweat glistening on her brow and the stains on her knuckle wraps. Miss Celia made her way down the stairs slowly, the early morning stillness weighing heavily in the basement where Tiana was deep in her training routine. Struggling to carry her weight, Step observed her granddaughter's intense training session. Despite Tiana demonstrating the discipline she had instilled in her, Step sensed something amiss. Setting down her coffee mug, she leaned against the wall in silence. Tiana's strikes grew fiercer in her presence, the sound of impact and breath filling the air. Eventually, Tiana paused, admitting she wasn't seeking improvement, but to numb her emotions. Miss Celia, recognizing the gravity of the moment, opted for silence rather than words, understanding the need for sensitivity. Tiana's composure faltered as she confessed her inner turmoil, her grandmother watching empathetically, knowing when not to push further. Tiana's emotional facade cracked as tears welled up, revealing her struggle with anger. Miss Celia approached her granddaughter cautiously, prepared to provide the support she needed. With deliberate steps, the animal-like Miss Celia approached Tiana cautiously. Her intention was to give Tiana the space to pull away if needed. However, as she gently placed a hand on her granddaughter's shoulder, Tiana didn't react negatively. Instead, it seemed as though Tiana's defenses crumbled with that simple touch. Without uttering a word, Miss Celia embraced Tiana. At first, Tiana's body remained stiff, resisting the vulnerability. Eventually, she surrendered to her grandmother's comforting arms, clutching onto her shirt as tears streamed down her face. They descended to the floor together, Tiana seeking solace in Miss Celia's arms as she did when she was young. Tiana released years of pent-up emotions, crying freely as Miss Celia offered unwavering support. In the growing light of dawn, Tiana's sobbing gradually subsided. They remained seated on the cold concrete floor, the punching bag casting shadows over them. When Tiana spoke again, her voice was strained but composed, admitting her belief that strength could shield her from pain. Miss Celia reassured her that true strength comes from embracing and processing emotions, not from suppressing them. As they sat in the basement, the weight of their shared experiences was palpable. Miss Celia observed both the toughness and vulnerability in Tiana, recognizing that their journey was far from over. In a hushed tone, she murmured, "Yet we remain standing." Tiana shut her eyes and rested her head wearily on her grandmother's shoulder, feeling drained but slightly relieved. Though the burden hadn't vanished, she found solace in not bearing it alone for the first time since the ordeal started. The basement now lay silent, save for their synchronized breathing, the forgotten coffee mug chilling on the shelf. The morning light cast golden squares on the floor, touching the edges of their shared silhouette as they lingered there quietly, embracing the faint whisper of hope that dawn brought. The crisp morning air nipped at Tiana as she made her way towards Hawthorne Grove High, each deliberate step on the sidewalk carrying the weight of her backpack filled with fresh notebooks. Celia had purchased replacement textbooks over the weekend, the straps of the bag leaving a faint impression on her skin, a constant reminder of the load she bore. Earlier that morning, Celia had stood in the kitchen with her car keys, her voice soft and cautious, careful not to overwhelm Tiana. Despite the concern etched on her grandmother's face in the morning light, Tiana declined the offer of a ride, adjusting her jacket and venturing out. The walk provided her with the solitude she craved, empowering her step by step as she navigated the neighborhood she was still unfamiliar with. As the school building loomed ahead, she maintained a composed expression, her chin up, concealing her emotions behind a controlled facade. The students were gathered around the front steps, their morning conversations fading as she walked by. Some averted their gaze, while others stared openly and whispered behind their hands. She paid no attention to them, walking through their hushed voices as if it were simply the morning mist, something fleeting that would dissipate over time. Although the corridors remained the same with their fluorescent lights flickering above and rows of blue lockers lining the walls, and the familiar faces looking away as she passed, there was a shift within her. It wasn't quite tranquility or acceptance, but rather a newfound resolve replacing the intense anger that had consumed her the week before. The morning chemistry class passed silently as she offered to answer a question about molecular bonds, only for Mrs. Peterson to overlook her and call on Tommy Martinez instead. Tiana calmly lowered her hand, maintaining her composure as she took detailed notes and focused on the comforting logic of chemical formulas. By lunchtime, the weight of the avoiding glances and turned backs weighed heavily on her, prompting her to seek solace in a quiet stairwell landing between floors. Sitting down on the cold concrete steps, she unwrapped a granola bar, the sound echoing in the empty space of her temporary refuge. In the afternoon, English class with Mr. Richards began, and Tiana took her typical seat by the window, opening her book. Their eyes were watching God. Students gradually filled the room, leaving an empty circle of desks around her, until someone unexpectedly sat in the vacant seat beside her. Tiana didn't immediately glance up, but she noticed someone settling in through her peripheral vision, pulling out books and arranging pencils. Finally, she turned her head slightly and saw Jessica Warner seated nearby. Jessica, with her honey blonde hair cascading in waves around her shoulders, was Kyle's younger sister. Unlike Kyle, who exuded sharp edges and aggression, Jessica was always soft-spoken, blending into the school's social scene. Jessica offered a small smile and softly asked, "Can I sit here?" Tiana didn't reply verbally. Instead, she faced the front of the classroom, her expression carefully neutral. Despite not moving away or finding another seat, she remained still as Mr. Richards delved into his lecture on symbolism and metaphor in Hurston's novel. The class progressed quietly, with Jessica taking notes beside Tiana. Occasionally, their elbows brushed as they wrote, but neither acknowledged the contact. When Mr. Richards instructed the class to discuss Chapter 3 in pairs, Jessica didn't force conversation. She simply opened her book and started reading, allowing Tiana to do the same, respecting the silence between them. As the bell rang to signal the end of class, students began to pack up. Amid the rustle of papers and zipping backpacks, Jessica gathered her books slowly before pausing. In a quiet voice intended solely for Tiana, she said, "I'm sorry about what they did." Tiana's hands paused momentarily over her backpack before she resumed packing, her movements steady and controlled, devoid of any twitching or tension. She offered no verbal response, but an unspoken understanding lingered in the air between them. Like the first breath after a long silence, the slightest crack in a wall constructed out of necessity, the library had become Tiana's haven in recent weeks. Amid the towering shelves and serene corners, she could almost disregard the burden on her shoulders. However, as she pushed through the hefty doors into the darkness outside, reality crashed down on her like a cold wave. The evening breeze had grown sharp, indicating the onset of autumn. Streetlights illuminated the sidewalk, forming pockets of brightness in the increasing darkness. Tiana adjusted her backpack, laden with borrowed books that kept her occupied during long hours at home. The familiar weight against her back offered solace, a shield of knowledge against everything else. Her footsteps reverberated against the concrete, the sound bouncing off vacant buildings. Most stores had closed for the night, their windows dim and uninviting. Walking faster, she stayed within the light pools, avoiding the shadows between them. Each step was deliberate, a routine she had honed over weeks. The narrow road ahead was flanked by barren trees and chain-link fences. By day, it was an ordinary street. But at night, every rustle of leaves made her heart race. Every distant car noise made her tense up. She had memorized every crack in the sidewalk, every faded crosswalk line on her journey home. Initially, a deep engine rumble signaled its arrival, followed by blinding lights flooding the sidewalk. Tiana's stride faltered as a black pickup truck inched alongside her, matching her pace. The air grew thin, making it harder to breathe. She recognized the truck. Everyone at school knew it was Brett Landry's prized possession. The shiny black F-150 he received from his parents for his 16th birthday glinted in the moonlight as the window automatically rolled down, emitting a loud mechanical noise that seemed out of place in the silent night. The unexpected sound sent shivers of unease down her spine. Brett's face emerged from the window, his usual smirk now contorted on his features as he arrogantly remarked, "You still think you own this town?" His tone, though familiar, now carried a more sinister edge, confident in the absence of any witnesses or authority figures to intervene. Tiana, recalling her grandmother's advice to avoid confrontation, kept walking with her gaze fixed straight ahead. Gripping her backpack straps tightly, she tried to calm herself by counting her breaths and steady her nerves. Suddenly, a sharp whistle pierced the air, followed by the explosion of a glass bottle just a few inches away from her, scattering fragments across the sidewalk and filling the air with the stench of beer. Brett's menacing command to retreat echoed in the darkness as his truck sped away, leaving behind the smell of burning rubber and his cruel laughter lingering in the night. Tiana stood frozen, heart pounding, as she surveyed the shattered glass on the ground, resembling broken stars under the streetlight. Despite her trembling legs, she urged herself to move forward, each step quicker than the last, until she was almost running towards the safety of her house, signaled by the warm glow of the porch light. In the darkness, Miss Celia sat in her usual chair, her silhouette firm and unwavering as Tiana approached her. The expression on her grandmother's face shifted from casual observation to sharp concern. Tiana, who had been taught to hide her emotions by Celia, tried to steady her shaking hands as she climbed the porch steps. However, she couldn't conceal her trembling from Celia, the woman who had instilled strength in her. Celia, with eyes trained by years of military experience, noticed every detail: the slight tremor in Tiana's movements, the tension in her shoulders, and her inability to make eye contact. Without saying a word, Celia stood up and opened her arms. Tiana walked into the embrace, letting her backpack fall to the ground with a thud. Pressing her face against her grandmother's shoulder, she breathed in the comforting scent of lavender and resilience. The hug felt like finding home, in a way the house alone never could. They lingered in that embrace before moving inside, where the house enveloped them with warmth. The soft light of lamps, the gentle hum of the heating, and the lingering aroma of dinner acting as shields against a dangerous world. Later, they settled on the couch, with Tiana resting her head in her grandmother's lap, staring blankly ahead. Celia's fingers moved gently through her hair, offering soothing strokes, as the television murmured quietly in the background. In each other's presence, they found solace and solidity without truly watching the TV. Tiana's tired whisper broke the silence. "Why can't I just exist?" Her eyes were filled with heat and tears threatened, but she was too exhausted to shed them, too weary of always having to be strong. Celia's fingers continued their calming movements as she responded softly, "Because surviving can feel intimidating when you don't conform to expectations, yet that doesn't mean you should give up on living." Her voice possessed a gentle but resolute quality, reminiscent of steel encased in velvet. The soft morning light seeped faintly through the windows of the classroom, casting delicate shadows over the pages of Tiana's book. She had been fixated on the same paragraph for what seemed like an eternity, with the words merging into incomprehensible forms. Evidence of another restless night adorned her eyes in the form of dark circles, a result of replaying the sounds of breaking glass and screeching tires. Her fingers quivered slightly as she turned a page without actually absorbing its contents. The classroom hummed with the usual pre-lesson banter, though it felt distant, like faint echoes underwater. Laughter erupted from a cluster of students in the back corner, sharing a private joke, while Tiana remained focused on her book, upholding the unseen barrier she had constructed between herself and the rest of the world. This method made things simpler and safer. Limiting attachments meant less pain when they eventually turned their backs on her. A gentle scraping of a chair against the linoleum jolted her from her reverie, as Jessica Warner cautiously occupied the seat beside her, handling her movements as if approaching a wounded creature. Tiana instinctively tensed her shoulders but refrained from meeting Jessica's gaze. She had grown accustomed to Jessica's silent companionship in recent days, even though she couldn't comprehend the reason behind it. A faint object touched her desk. A folded piece of notebook paper, nudged across the surface by Jessica's hesitant hand. Tiana stared at it, her heart quickening a notch. These days, notes were rarely friendly. Usually, they harbored threats or insults, either shoved through her locker slots or nestled within her textbooks. The day before, she had discovered a note with a crude drawing that made her stomach tighten. However, this note was different. It was neatly folded, almost perfectly, and Jessica's presence beside her did not carry the usual hostility Tiana had grown accustomed to. Tiana hesitated to open the note, recalling all the mean messages she had received since a certain incident behind the gym. Trust had become a luxury she could not afford. After some hesitation, she carefully unfolded the paper, smoothing out the creases with trembling fingers. 5 words were written in tidy handwriting. "You shouldn't be alone in this." There was no mockery or malice, just a simple statement that broke through her defenses. The straightforward sentence hit her like a physical blow, causing her throat to tighten. Tiana read it repeatedly, feeling Jessica's gaze on her, but she couldn't muster a response. She had constructed a thick, high wall of protection around herself and had forgotten how to trust. The teacher began the lesson, sparing Tiana from acknowledging the note or its sender. She placed the paper in her book, but its message seemed to sear through the pages. Throughout the class, her mind wandered back to those 5 words, making the equations the teacher was teaching seem trivial compared to the genuine connection being offered. When the bell rang, Tiana swiftly gathered her belongings and tried to exit without making eye contact, sticking to her routine of avoiding interactions. However, Jessica's voice stopped her in the hallway, gentle yet firm. "Wait, please." Startling herself, Tiana halted and turned slowly, crossing her arms defensively. Jessica stood a few feet away, nervously playing with her messenger bag strap, her worried blue eyes catching Tiana's attention. "I know what they did," she whispered softly, glancing around to ensure no one was eavesdropping. "Kyle has changed. He's becoming darker, and Brett is influencing him further." Her words rushed out, indicating she had been holding them in for a while. Tiana felt a chill in her stomach hearing those names, recalling vivid images of the gym incident with the bottle smashing against the concrete. As Jessica moved closer, her face displaying genuine concern, she expressed her desire to help, but admitted her uncertainty. Tiana felt a surge of emotions, releasing all the pain, fear, and anger she had bottled up. Her response came out abruptly, suggesting Jessica should understand her perspective first. Jessica flinched at the sharp tone, taking a step back with hurt evident in her eyes before walking away without a word. Tiana watched her disappear into the bustling hallway, feeling the anger dissipate quickly, replaced by a sense of emptiness. She regretted snapping at Jessica, acknowledging that the gesture had likely been the first genuine act of kindness towards her. The barriers she had constructed at the school were impenetrable, shielding her from both negativity and positivity. By pushing away the only person who had tried to connect with her, Tiana replayed the interaction in her mind throughout the day. Jessica's genuine concern and worries about her brother marked the first time anyone had acknowledged that something was amiss, suggesting the issue might lie within their community. In class, Tiana felt the absence of the companion she had grown accustomed to, intensifying her isolation and regret. She longed to reconcile with Jessica and clarify her feelings, but explaining her frustration with the school, town, and unfair circumstances seemed daunting. Standing in the hallway during the break, Tiana gazed at the spot where Jessica had stood, now occupied by unfamiliar faces and indifferent conversations. With Jessica's absence, the potential connection Tiana could have forged felt lost. The hallway felt colder and more unwelcoming without that friendly presence, leaving Tiana frustrated with the world, the situation, and herself. The note in her book served as both an offer of support and a reminder that she didn't have to face these challenges alone. Alone and unsure if it was by choice or circumstance, She felt a heavy realization in her chest as she made her way to class, pondering if she had ruined her chance of finding an ally in the indifferent and cruel environment. The morning sun illuminated the hallway, casting golden stripes on the walls as Celia Brooks stood outside Tiana's room. The house was eerily silent, persisting for days. Knocking gently, she mentioned making eggs the way Tiana liked, but there was no response. With a sense of familiarity from her time in the Marines, she cautiously entered the empty, meticulously arranged room, noticing an unusual heaviness in the air when she reached the basement. Tiana sat on the floor, lost in her thoughts, as Celia quietly reminded her of the impending school time, receiving no reaction. Her granddaughter, Tiana, remained motionless in the basement, her expression void of any emotion. Celia, accustomed to dealing with difficult situations, felt a sense of unease creeping up on her as the morning went by without Tiana responding to her text messages. Despite her silent phone indicating messages were delivered but unread, Celia continued to reach out with caring words. Eventually, the air in the basement became heavy with unspoken tension, prompting Celia to finally venture upstairs to Tiana's room. She found herself drawn to Tiana's journal, which she had never read before out of respect for her privacy. As she scanned the neat but increasingly distressed entries detailing Tiana's struggles, the impact of the last words Tiana wrote, "I don't want to disappear, but maybe I should," hit Celia hard. The weight of those words felt like a physical blow, triggering memories of past challenges she had faced. This new battle, however, was different, requiring a different approach that couldn't be fought with physical force or strategic planning. As evening fell, the house grew darker, and Celia found herself at the kitchen window gazing at the gathering shadows in the backyard. Clutching the journal, she stood with determination, while the closed basement door kept her granddaughter isolated below. In a firm whisper, she vowed, "I won't let you disappear on my watch," her voice unwavering despite the tremor. With her car keys tightly gripped in her hand, she set down the journal with a soft thump in the echoing silence of the house. Celia squared her shoulders, reminiscent of her past missions, as she knew this one was crucial for her granddaughter's well-being, leaving no room for retreat. In the still basement air, Tiana slept against the wall, her presence tugging at Celia's heartstrings. Moving closer to her granddaughter, she softly urged her to wake up, knowing they needed to go for a drive despite Tiana's reluctance due to fatigue. Celia's firm yet tender voice resonated, emphasizing the importance of moving forward even when tired. Tiana gazed at her grandmother, noticing the determined expression she had seen countless times before, signaling unwavering resolve. With a tired sigh, Tiana rose from the floor, feeling her stiff joints after sitting for so long. The cool night air brushed against their skin as they made their way to the car, stars twinkling in the sky above. Celia started the engine, and they drove off in silence, passing through deserted streets and closed shops. Tiana observed as familiar sights faded away, replaced by unknown back roads with rough pavement and looming trees. After driving for 20 minutes, Celia halted the car in front of a weathered metal gate, overgrown with rust and clinging vines. Without a word, Celia alighted from the vehicle and opened the creaking gate under the headlights' glow. Encouraging Tiana to join her, they ventured into the night, discovering an abandoned military compound. Tiana's footsteps echoed on gravel paths surrounded by eerie, silent structures with darkened windows. Celia eventually broke the silence, revealing that this was where she had served in 1973, fresh out of basic training at 19 years old. During training, I believed I was fully prepared for any situation. However, when she stopped by a weathered building and ran her hand along the peeling paint, I realized I wasn't ready for the loneliness that followed. The way people would glance at me as if I were intruding just by merely being present in their surroundings caught me off guard. Tiana observed her grandmother's face closely, noting subtle hints of past hurts that surfaced in her expressions. "They used to hide my belongings," Celia disclosed as they walked at a leisurely pace, "leaving notes in my locker. There was nothing they could be caught for. They were clever like that." but they made it clear that I wasn't welcome. Passing by a faded and torn flag, I'd sit in my bunk at night, clutching my weapon, wondering if I had made an error in thinking I could fit in. Being the sole individual resembling myself, they ensured I never overlooked it. Tiana felt a lump in her throat as these words struck a chord, mirroring her own struggles at school. As they arrived at a worn wooden bench, marked by years of exposure to the elements, Celia sat down and patted the seat next to her for Tiana to join. The bench creaked under their combined weight. "Here's the crucial part you must grasp." Celia turned towards her granddaughter. "I endured all of that not for you to suffer in silence. That is not our legacy." Tiana felt something deep inside her fracture at these words, tears cascading down her cheeks as her repressed emotions flowed out. "I'm weary," she confessed, her voice cracking. "I'm exhausted from just surviving. I yearn to truly live." Celia reached out, clasping Tiana's hand tightly, providing a sense of stability amidst the turmoil. Beneath the vast stars above, they sat together, their shared pain hanging in the space between them. The silence around them felt different this time, not suffocating or filled with unspoken fears and bottled anger. It was like a comforting blanket, enveloping them both in safety, warmth, and healing. They sat together in the quiet of the abandoned compound, where echoes of past struggles and triumphs surrounded them. Grandmother and granddaughter sat hand in hand, allowing the night to embrace them gently. The kitchen clock ticked softly in the early morning stillness as Celia moved through her morning routine with practiced efficiency. She measured coffee grounds into the filter while steam rose from the kettle, her muscles slightly stiff from the previous night's drive and lengthy conversation at the old barracks. Despite this, her mind felt clearer than it had in days. Outside the kitchen window, the sky was transitioning from black to deep blue as dawn approached. The streetlight continued to glow, casting long shadows over their small front yard. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the occasional passing car and distant rumble of early morning delivery trucks. Celia reached for her favorite mug, a Christmas gift from Tiana 3 years ago, with "World's Toughest Grandma" boldly printed on it. A small smile crossed her lips as she recalled Tiana's proud expression when she had received it. This memory warmed Celia's heart, especially after their breakthrough the previous night. Perhaps they could now begin moving forward together, navigating their way through the current challenges. Glancing at the ceiling where Tiana was still asleep upstairs, Celia knew the girl needed the rest, genuine rest without the troubled dozing she had experienced in the basement. Celia had heard Tiana moving around her room late into the night, but at least she was back in her own bed. The coffee machine softly gurgled, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma as Celia leaned against the counter, contemplating the day ahead. The idea of skipping school crossed her mind, taking a moment to relax. Suddenly, the silence of the house was shattered by the sound of a glass breaking. Celia's coffee mug slipped from her grasp and hit the floor with a sharp crack. Her instincts from her military training immediately kicked in, propelling her towards the front room barefoot, despite the glass crunching under her feet. Her heart raced as she surveyed the scene. The shattered glass, the cold air breezing in through the broken window, and a brick lying among the shards. Moving swiftly, she peered out the window into the dim light, but the street was deserted, with no signs of anyone fleeing. As she picked up the brick, she noticed a photo taped to it, her granddaughter Tiana's school picture, vandalized with red ink and a threatening message. Celia's controlled demeanor masked the anger boiling inside her, but her composure shattered when Tiana rushed downstairs in a panic, questioning what had happened. Concealing the photo, Celia met Tiana's fearful gaze as the girl stood frozen in the doorway, taking in the broken window and scattered glass. Celia firmly instructed Tiana to put on shoes as there was glass scattered around, then asked which pair she would wear. Once Tiana left, Celia quickly hid the photo in her robe pocket, not wanting to burden her granddaughter further. She called 911 in a precise manner, ensuring help would arrive soon. When Tiana returned, she seemed small and vulnerable in her purple hoodie and sneakers, a stark contrast to her usual confident self. Tiana asked Celia if it was the culprits, but before Celia could respond, police lights flashed through the broken window, and officers arrived at the scene nonchalantly. The officers conducted their investigation mechanically, asking standard questions despite the lack of security cameras or witnesses. One officer speculated it might be random vandalism due to the season, leaving Celia feeling unsettled by the photo. In her pocket, she kept silent, fully aware of the consequences of revealing it to them. More dismissals, more explanations, more silence. They lingered on the front porch as the police car drove away with its lights now dimmed, the sun emerging, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold that seemed to contrast the ugliness of the morning. Tiana, since the police had arrived, had not uttered a word. She stood with her arms tightly folded, shoulders hunched, as if attempting to make herself a less visible target. The morning newspaper lay in the driveway, wrapped in its plastic, a mundane sight on such an extraordinary morning. Celia's gaze shifted to the shattered window, the glinting glass on the grass, her granddaughter's somber expression, feeling the weight of the photograph in her pocket like a heavy burden. "Come on," she eventually said. "Let's clear this up." The afternoon sun seeped through the blue tarp shielding the broken window, creating odd shadows on the bedroom floor. Miss Celia moved with deliberate slowness, her worn hands caressing each piece of clothing before placing it in the aged leather suitcase, evoking memories of military deployments, precise and always prepared. Folding one of Tiana's sweaters, the soft purple one she wore on chilly mornings, followed by her own Marine Corps sweatshirt, faded yet dignified, each item symbolizing a fragment of their life here, a life now unexpectedly jeopardized in this town they once called home. The house resettled with creaks and groans, enveloping her in silence, interrupted only by the rustling of fabric and the subtle zipping of the suitcase's compartments. On her dresser, family photos observed her as she packed, including Tiana's mother in her graduation attire and a youthful image of Tiana. Before the accident, the 3 generations of Brooks women were gathered for their last Christmas together, with Celia holding a framed photo of Tiana's mother. Reflecting on her own tired face in the glass, Celia carefully wrapped the frame in a soft t-shirt and nestled it among layers of clothing in a suitcase. Tiana interrupted her packing, surprised by the scene before her, which included open suitcases, half-empty drawers, and piles of clothes waiting to be packed. With a mixture of confusion and concern in her voice, Tiana asked, "What are you doing?" Celia, focused on her task, avoided meeting her granddaughter's eyes as she placed the wrapped frame securely in the suitcase and suggested, "I have friends in Carolina. We can leave tonight." The ensuing silence felt weighty until Tiana, embodying a presence reminiscent of her mother, filled the room. Celia, facing her granddaughter at last, noticed the strength in Tiana's features, a far cry from the uncertain girl of weeks past. Recognizing the transformation in Tiana, Celia softened her voice and expressed, "I want you safe. That's my job." Tiana, moving closer with deliberate steps, mirrored Celia's controlled demeanor. As she instructed her, there was an additional element present that exceeded mere teaching. The young girl paused, and Celia observed a tightening of her jaw as she communicated with unwavering confidence. "If we flee, they triumph." The impactful words lingered in the space between them. Celia scrutinized her granddaughter's countenance, seeking any hint of apprehension, but found none. Instead, she perceived a resolute calmness emerging from deep within her. "I refuse to hide any longer," declared Tiana, her voice gaining strength with each uttered phrase. Celia sensed a shift within herself and the room. Despite weeks of trying to shield Tiana from the world's harshness, she now faced a person who stood strong and resolute, independent of protection, ready to confront challenges head-on. With deliberate movements, Celia closed the half-packed suitcase, its clasps resonating in the tranquil room. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she felt the weight of years spent battling her own struggles. Tiana joined her, their shoulders touching, as the fading afternoon light cast elongated shadows across the floor. "I suppose I raised a warrior after all," Celia murmured softly. Tiana's smile exuded a gentle yet definite assurance as she responded, "You raised a soldier." The following Monday morning ushered in a brisk autumn chill as Tiana, standing at her bedroom mirror, ran her fingers over her mother's weathered leather jacket. The familiar scent of vanilla and jasmine intertwined in the soft brown fabric enveloped her like a protective shield. Downstairs, Miss Celia observed her granddaughter descending the staircase with a newfound sense of gone was the hesitation that had previously marked her actions in life. Instead, something more resolute and grounded now stood in its place. "That jacket suits you well," Celia remarked softly, noticing a change in her granddaughter's demeanor. "Your mama used to wear it just like that, as if she owned any room she walked into." Tiana nodded, adjusting the collar. "I sense her presence with me today," she added. The walk to school was peaceful yet purposeful. Tiana's confident steps echoed on the sidewalk, mirroring her grandmother's military posture. The morning sun illuminated her braids, accentuating the subtle purple beads woven through them, a small act of defiance and beauty. At school, Tiana navigated the halls with an unwavering presence, reminiscent of her mother's. In class, the weight of her notebook seemed to pulse with unspoken words that begged to be shared. Mrs. Patel, with her elegant gray-streaked hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, announced an open mic session in English class. The room fell silent, with only a few uncomfortable movements. Slowly and deliberately, Tiana raised her hand, surprising Mrs. Patel with a glimmer of hope. As she made her way to the front of the classroom, every step on the linoleum floor felt amplified. Tiana could feel the intensity of the gazes upon her, sensing the anticipation building in the room. As she faced her classmates, she opened her notebook and took a deep breath. The room fell silent as she spoke softly at first, but her voice grew stronger with each word, filling the space with a quiet yet powerful presence. She expressed how others failed to notice the hidden bruises that words can inflict, unlike physical wounds that fists can't reach. She described how silence becomes a means of survival, and how one learns to contain their pain within, swallowing screams like bitter pills. The unspoken rage that simmers inside, burning holes in peace, went unnoticed by many. She acknowledged seeing it all in reflections, in her grandmother's eyes and her mother's smile. Expressing her exhaustion from being unseen and unheard, she declared her desire to no longer just survive, but to truly live. Her final words lingered in the air, causing a shift in the room's atmosphere. The silence that followed was heavy with realization and shame. One person wiped their eyes, another audibly caught their breath, and their teacher, Mrs. Patel, stood motionless, tears welling up in her eyes. In a sudden burst of emotion, a student named Kyle Warner stood up, his face a storm of conflicting feelings, and left the classroom in a rush, letting the door slam behind him. Meanwhile, Jessica, Tiana's classmate, remained in her seat, her gaze fixed on Tiana, filled with profound understanding. Without making a move to wipe away the tears resembling sorrow that streamed down her face, Tiana watched as the bells ringing jolted everyone back to reality. Students slowly packed up their belongings, moving in a sluggish manner almost as if underwater. As they exited the room, many glanced at Tiana with newfound admiration rather than pity or fear. Jessica lingered and silently conveyed her support by gently touching Tiana's arm, sharing a brief moment of connection through a gentle squeeze before leaving. Tiana closed her notebook thoughtfully, feeling the weight of the emotion she had just poured onto its pages. Despite the bruises and lingering pain, she sensed a shift, as if a door had opened to welcome in light. In the late afternoon on Monday, the library was bathed in long shadows, with Tiana seated at her secluded table nestled behind towering reference shelves. Although her headphones were plugged in, no music played, a tactic she used to maintain distance while remaining alert to her surroundings. Peering out through the tall windows, she observed the sun setting beyond the football field, casting an orange hue over the empty bleachers. Her mother's jacket rested on the back of her chair, offering a sense of solace even when not being worn. Amidst the hushed sounds of pencils scratching and intermittent whispers from fellow students, Tiana sat with an open notebook before her, lost in thought. Her mind drifted to the morning's English class, recalling the poem she had shared before Kyle's abrupt departure. Suddenly, movement caught her attention as Jessica Warner appeared in her line of sight. Pulling back her blonde hair into a messy ponytail, she nervously glanced around the bookshelves, tightly clutching her phone to her chest. Catching sight of Tiana, she walked over with determination, bypassing the need for permission, and seated herself across from her. The scraping of the wooden chair legs caught a few students' attention momentarily. Placing her phone on the table with slightly shaking hands, she whispered in a barely audible voice, "I need to show you something." Tiana slowly removed her headphones, observing the transformation in Jessica's demeanor from her usual softness to a mix of fear and determination. Unlocking her phone, Jessica displayed a series of screenshots and text messages between Kyle and Brett, sliding the device towards Tiana. The conversation revealed detailed plans, cruel jokes, and explicit threats that were undeniably alarming. As Tiana read through the messages, her heart raced, but she held back tears, indicating she had shed enough already. Meeting Jessica's gaze filled with guilt and concern, Tiana nodded in a gesture that conveyed understanding, saying quietly, "Thank you," with a steady voice amidst the inner turmoil. Jessica's eyes welled up as she confessed, "I'm sorry I didn't intervene sooner. I sensed something was amiss, but I was afraid of Kyle's changed behavior since Brett." "You've stopped it now." Tiana interrupted her, rising from the table to collect her belongings systematically. Notebook, pencils, her mother's jacket. Watching Tiana uncertainly, Jessica heard her say, "Come with me," in a firm tone that left no room for hesitation. Together, they strolled through the library, leaving the past behind. Their footsteps resonated against the lockers as they strolled down the deserted hallway, where the late afternoon sunlight filtered through the windows, casting intricate patterns of shadow and gold. In the front office, the secretary glanced up with mild surprise when Tiana firmly declared, "I must speak with Principal Howard immediately." Without hesitation, the secretary reached for the intercom upon sensing something commanding in Tiana's voice. Inside Howard's cluttered office, adorned with trophies and awards, the principal barely acknowledged their entrance as he focused on his computer screen. Tiana placed Jessica's phone in front of him, displaying the incriminating messages. "What is the meaning of this?" he inquired dismissively, to which Tiana responded that it was evidence of the vandalism and threats they had faced. Howard briefly glanced at the screen before assuring they would investigate, adopting the same nonchalant attitude as before. Tiana leaned forward on his desk, exuding determination, demanding that he take further action. As Howard met her gaze, a flicker of surprise crossed his face at encountering a young woman asserting her authority instead of a frightened student. Without further words, Tiana turned and left, Jessica following closely behind. In the hallway, Jessica dialed Celia's number on her own phone, declaring to her grandmother, "It's time." Tiana sat on the front steps, phone in hand, feeling the cool concrete beneath her as she gazed out into the late afternoon air. On the school premises where they had attempted to discourage her, her voice barely rose above a whisper as she communicated on the phone, suggesting to meet with the lawyer on Friday morning. The day arrived with a sense of heavy anticipation as they entered the school board meeting room, characterized by its sterile atmosphere, tense ambiance, fluorescent lighting, and an endlessly long wooden table. Tiana and her grandmother sat upright in their professional outfits, opposite Principal Howard in his rumpled suit, the stern-faced superintendent, and two board members nervously shuffling papers. Their attorney, Mr. Keene, commanded attention without uttering a word, impeccably dressed in a navy suit with neatly combed silver hair, expertly arranging documents on the table. The room smelled of both coffee and nervous tension as Mr. Keene, with over 3 decades of experience in civil rights cases, announced the beginning of the meeting. Displaying a thick folder containing printed screenshots protected in plastic sleeves, he emphasized the documented pattern of racial harassment ignored and even facilitated by the school administration. Pointing out incriminating text messages between Brett Landry and Kyle Warner, he highlighted the premeditated nature of their attacks on Miss Brooks. The principal squirmed in his chair, visibly uncomfortable, while the superintendent's lips pressed tightly together. Mr. Keene pointed out the unequal disciplinary measures taken when Miss Brooks defended herself against physical assault, resulting in immediate suspension compared to the leniency shown towards Landry and Warner for vandalizing her property. Celia and Tiana faced no repercussions for the explicit threats they encountered. Sitting at the table, Celia's hand found Tiana's and gently squeezed it, as Tiana maintained a neutral but resolute expression, focused straight ahead. The lawyer meticulously detailed each troubling incident, from racist slurs on lockers to destroyed textbooks and threatening messages, culminating in a brick thrown through their window. As the board members absorbed each piece of evidence, their expressions grew more serious. Mr. Keene asserted firmly, the school's failure to protect Miss Brooks has fostered a hostile learning environment, citing violations of several federal laws, including Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. The superintendent interjected, asking, "What are your demands?" Celia confidently replied, "We seek justice." The board members convened, discussing in subdued tones, until they somberly announced, "We will vote to immediately expel both Brett Landry and Kyle Warner," and added, "Principal Howard will issue a formal written apology." In a trembling gesture, Howard pushed an envelope across the table to Tiana, who, without reaching for it, declared, "It's not for me, it's for every overlooked student." The profound words lingered as Howard, visibly embarrassed, retracted the letter. Later that day, as Tiana navigated the school corridors, a notable shift was observed. Students fell silent not with animosity, but with a newfound understanding, perhaps even shame. Near her locker, Chase Warren, devoid of his usual bravado, tentatively approached her, his voice soft and faltering. "I don't expect your forgiveness," he murmured, his gaze fixed on the floor. Tiana silently observed Chase, the boy who had previously laughed at Brett's jokes, remained passive during the harassment, and had contributed to the issue by not intervening. Without uttering a word, she walked past him, her footsteps reverberating in the quiet hallway, conveying a profound message about responsibility, repercussions, and the consequences of being a bystander. With his shoulders slumped, Chase finally realized the gravity of his decisions. As Monday morning arrived with clear skies, Tiana entered the school alone, just like she did on the first day, but everything had changed. She exuded confidence, walking with her head held high and wearing her mother's jacket as a symbol of pride, not fear. The hallways fell silent as she passed, not with the oppressive quiet from before, but with a newfound awareness. Students observed her with respect and perhaps even admiration. Upon reaching her locker, Tiana noticed a message written in fresh black marker. "They messed with the wrong girl." She gazed at the words, a small but genuine smile forming on her lips. If you found Tiana's story intriguing, I have selected another tale that you will appreciate. Do not miss out on it. Click here to watch.